Great guest today, as always. Sasha Latypova comes back, former pharmaceutical R&D executive with over 25 years of experience, who is in a better position than probably anybody in the COVID vaccine conversation in terms of analyzing and forming opinions about the manufacturing process of these vaccines, as well as the process under which they were examined prior to being brought to manufacturing. And then we're going to be then visited by the great Bhattacharya. He had a wonderful conference about a week ago where he brought together, I think it's the first of its kind, bringing together varied opinions on the successes and failures of the COVID pandemic. It was a valiant effort. It was criticized roundly by some idiots, and we'll talk about that. But generally, it was a rousing success, and more like it should be attempted. Be right back with Sasha Latypova after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I want to teach you about pharmacogenomic testing. This is changing the way we approach healthcare. By analyzing a patient's genetic profile, pharmacogenomics helps physicians personalize drug treatments for more effective results. First, it enhances medication efficacy by predicting how a patient will respond to a specific drug, reducing the trial and error process, especially in mental health care. For example, it can guide the choice of various medications to minimize side effects and improve outcomes. In the long run, pharmacogenomic testing leads to cost savings. It shortens the time to find the right treatment and avoids expensive side effects. It also supports more personalized care, helping physicians make better decisions and ensuring that treatments are tailored to each individual's unique genetic makeup. Test simply requires you to swab your cheek, then you send in the sample to our lab. Discover the power of personalized medicine with pharmacogenomic testing. Tailor your treatments based on your unique genetic makeup. Reduce trial and error, avoid side effects, find the most effective medication for you. Take control of your health today. Go to drdrew.com/checkgenetics. That is drdrew.com/checkgenetics. Joint and muscle pains are exhausting and frustrating, but I've got a over-the-counter medication I want to introduce you to that provides great relief using the power of, check it out, chili peppers. Capsidin is made with a proprietary formula that contains no non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, no opioids, no anesthetic or steroid, nothing, no chance for addiction, no side effects. No chance it's going to interact with other medication you might be taking. Capsidin contains capsaicin, which is the substance in chili peppers that burns your tongue. That gives you that burny feeling. And of course, I've recommended capsaicin creams to patients over the years, but other capsaicin creams burn your skin. That's what makes capsidin so unique. In clinical trials, capsidin has actually been demonstrated not to burn.
I've been using capsidin to relieve my pain in my hands and my wrist from carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis. The results have been amazing. I use it every day during my show, and I highly recommend it.
Get the pain relief you need from various sources, even backache, sprains, bruises even. Order now at capsidin.com/Drew to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. That is CAPSADYN, capsidin.com/DREW. Susan is very excited about her capsidin. There she is using it behind me. She was just using it during that break, and she's like, yeah, show them what you're doing. There she is. Excellent. So, again, capsaicin creams have been around for a long time. This is a significant step forward if you have those sorts of pretty neuropathic pain and that kind of thing. So let's get to Sasha Latypova. She was an R&D executive for over 25 years of experience in clinical trials, clinical technologies, regulatory approvals. She sees through a lot of the nonsense about the conversations on the vaccine manufacturing. You can follow her Substack, Sasha Latypova, Latypova, Sasha, Latypova.substack.com, and Sasha _Latypova on X. Sasha, welcome to the program.
Hi, Dr. Drew. Thank you for inviting me again.
It's good to see you as always. I was thinking about, when you leave me with lots of concerns every time we have a conversation. It's sort of the borders on scaring me. You border on scaring me because I believe what you not just I believe what your opinions are highly authoritative. So I take them very seriously. But I wonder if your thinking has evolved since we last spoke. It's probably been 6 months or so since we last talked to you. What kinds of things? I don't want to yet talk about this nonsense about the self-replicating whatever. To me that looked like hysteria right from the start. But before we go to that, what else has happened since we last spoke? You had grave concerns about your manufacturing process last time we talked.
All right. So the manufacturing, those remain grave concerns. In fact, I've gotten additional information that it's even worse than I thought, and the problem actually goes a long time back. Even my colleague Catherine traced the relevant U.S. law all the way back to late 1700s. And so we now have a better understanding of the regulatory frameworks in the U.S. As it applies to vaccines, all vaccines in general, and then a much greater understanding about the COVID shots, which are EUA countermeasures, and how that's regulated. And in summary, I can say none of it is regulated. The FDA kind of regulates these things, and that's been the case since forever. And another important discovery.
I'm going to interrupt you because we got a little delay here, so people get frustrated with me stepping in. But I want you to actually give us a little disquisition on what you've learned, and if indeed the FDA is really a faux supervisor, if their regulations are so lax, that would explain why the studies were so shitty, frankly. Because they really had no intent to really do the work in the first place. So please give me the cliff notes or the shark notes, as we call them now.
Right. So the law research is ongoing, and Catherine and one of the colleagues are writing a big report on relevant law tracing back to, as I said, late 1700s, when vaccination, as we kind of know it in the modern world, has started being used more or less in mass subjects. Now, in the U.S., the vaccines have not been under FDA mandate until 1973. Many people don't realize that. They were not regulated at all as pharmaceuticals. They were manufactured essentially by Public Health Service, which is predecessor of CDC, the U.S. government, Public Health Service. And they were sort of, you could order the samples or whatever you needed, the box. You could even order it in the mail from the US government and they would send it to you. And so up until 1973, there were no regulation and no standards for manufacturing, for purity testing, for contaminants, for characterizing what you have made in the pharmaceutical process, which is standard for anybody who works in pharma making drugs. That didn't exist, really. It wasn't anything codified. After 1973, they technically came under FDA purview. And as you know, in 86, there was a national vaccine, I forget the correct name of the law, but basically the act that came in that shielded all the manufacturers from liability. That was under Reagan. And since then, the manufacturers of vaccines had no liability. And if you have no liability for injuries or deaths that you cause, then it's as if regulations don't exist for you because you have no consequences. Wouldn't that though motivate the FDA to be more circumspect and cautious in what they approved? You know what I mean? Isn't that their fiduciary responsibility? If there's no other checks and balances, aren't they the reviewers of last resort to make sure that the public is only exposed to something that isn't dangerous? In theory, you would say that if FDA were, had the best interest of the public in mind, but looking at their actions, looking at what's transpired, I don't believe that at all. And so FDA likewise has no liability because they're protected by sovereign immunity of the U.S. government. And neither does any agency in the executive branch. As we recently learned, the case which was filed by Children's Health Defense, George Watts versus DOD, was the only case where the family of a 24-year-old student who was killed by COVID shot, and it's known that he was killed by COVID shot, was proven by autopsy. They sued the DOD, and the case was just dismissed in a 2-page dismissal by the judge, saying that U.S. government is immune from prosecution. Not arguing the merits of the case, not disputing that this young man was killed by the U.S. government, forcing this on him as a condition of attending the university. They're not disputing it. They're just saying, you can't sue us. We're immune.
What about the university? Why not go after the schools?
And the school will point to the government. And so there's this, there's constant, okay, well, it's the government, or is it the private employer that's forcing you? Or well, the private employer is taking federal money, and as a condition of taking federal money, they also have to enforce all the government mandates. So that's how the system operates, right? So that's kind of the state. But as I said, the vaccines were never regulated as drugs. So there are no real requirements for them to comply with what the label says, both in the components and the ingredients and how they're made, in impurities, in other contaminants, in structural integrity of the ingredients that are supposed to be there. Nor in the claims that are made with respect to safety or efficacy, because those are also claims that go on the label. But there's no enforcement.
So hold on. So again, slow down. So is this why, when you looked at the manufacturing process and were so alarmed? Because you were expecting it to be held to the standards of usual pharmaceutical production, and what you saw was gross under service.
Exactly. So my first analysis, I know we've talked about it before, but I started looking into this whole thing from the manufacturing perspective, by just looking at various adverse events versus batch numbers for these vaccines. So I've done about 2 years of that research. We set up a website together with a colleague, Craig Parody-Cooper. We set up a website, How Bad Is Your Batch, where people could see this variability. So we were tracking it for a long time. I have a huge amount of data collected on that. At that time, when I first saw that data, which was sometime in the fall of 2021, enough data was assembled, I immediately said, this manufacturing process is not compliant with pharmaceutical regulation as I know them, because I worked on the pharma drugs. And I said, this product is non-compliant, because look at all this variability that's going on. It's not supposed to be this at all.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed since then. Nothing has changed.
And were you working also with the Dutch physician researcher? I can never pronounce her name. Vibeke Manneke, or whatever her name is. Yeah. Yeah. And so she has the best. Are there other publications that documented as clearly as she did?
Yes, so there is one new one came out from Children's Health Defense. I think Brian Hooker wrote this paper with colleagues, confirming her findings, doing some more in-depth findings, because more data became available through FOIA, like more detailed shipment information about these lots. So that all confirms the same findings.
Which makes sense. And then the 1986 law, I was persuaded or brainwashed to believe that vaccines were a lost leader for pharmaceutical companies. Now, the recent, what we all witnessed happen to Pfizer and Moderna in response to the massive distribution of COVID vaccines, clearly there's profits to be made. Where did that, do you know where that came from? This idea that they had to have a restriction in liabilities because otherwise they wouldn't make vaccines because there was no profit from vaccines?
Yes, so there is always this back and forth between private pharmas and U.S. government, and that's been going on since the 80s and maybe even before. So the U.S. government comes in and says, we need to vaccinate everyone. It's our policy. We can address that. Like, where is that coming from? We can address it separately. But let's say, U.S. government comes to private pharma and says, you must make these products for me. I'm going to buy, this many. And the pharma says, well, I need guarantees. And then pharmas know that you can't make safe vaccines. And actually, that's another recent discovery I've made. Not my discovery. This is discovery from 100 years ago. But everybody knows this in that sector, that you can't make safe vaccines. That's not possible. It's not possible to vaccinate safely due to anaphylaxis. And they all know it. So they know for sure if they're forced to vaccinate large percentages of the US population, large percentages of US population is going to get injuries and is going to die because of these products, and it will eventually come back to them. They're smart. The people, they're very smart. They have internal systems to protect themselves from liability like you won't believe. Like there's so many processes designed specifically to shield the company and its executives from any liability. So when this proposition comes on the table and they all know what's involved, they're saying, I need guarantees. I can't make this. Oh, this is a loss leader for me. I'm so inconvenienced by this that US government has to give me a bunch of concessions before I agree to this deal. And that's how they kind of back and forth negotiate over time. And so that's the 86 law. Now in 2005, they actually went even further and said, oh, now we need PrEP Act. In addition to all these other layers of protection that we have, we also need the PrEP Act. So you see, it's this cycle that they do. The U.S. government with pharma.
It's incestuous, which is why the cross-pollination of executives between the regulatory agencies and the companies is that much more disturbing. So you mentioned anaphylaxis as inevitable, which but aren't there other adverse events that they're worried about too, given any particular vaccine product?
So anaphylaxis, you may think of very narrowly, and I did too. As all healthcare professionals today I talk to, they all think that way. So everybody thinks that anaphylaxis is only type 1 reaction when somebody drops immediately on the ground because their blood pressure dropped very quickly. I witnessed it with COVID injections walking into a grocery store. I saw it. Yeah. And so that's the type 1 reaction. But turns out, so Charles Richet was a French researcher in 1913, was given Nobel Prize for his work on anaphylaxis. And so he has demonstrated clearly that injection of any non-self protein, and this includes not just toxins, but any protein that's considered benign, like milk, like cereal, albumin, like corn protein, soy protein, peanut oil, gelatin, all those components of vaccines, when injected, induce anaphylaxis. And anaphylaxis is anything from mild rash and some kind of an allergy to a very severe shock. And it's the same phenomenon. At the same time, people were introducing this idea, calling it allergy, and he said it's inappropriate because it's the same underlying condition. And it's unpredictable. So you don't know who is going to get anaphylactized by what and to what severity.
And then today we worry about, with the COVID vaccine, we worry about the pathological mechanism being the spike protein being produced in quantities that are out of control, or at least enough to cause adverse events. And again, do you have any theory? One of the questions I keep asking is why, if they're so hell-bent on vaccine, and I want you to tell me about that vaccine distribution or vaccine, everyone needs to be vaccinated mandate, why only the mRNA vaccines? Why can't we use Covaxin? Why can't we use Novavax? Why can't we use, why do we have to use something that produces the pathogenic mechanism? You know what I mean? Forget the platforms, forget the nuclear, forget everything else. Just, we're only going to use the vaccine produces the protein that we know is the problem, as opposed to whole virus alternatives. What is going on there? Do you have any theory?
Well, so it's a very interesting question. Yes, why everyone went that way, even for the IP reasons. Different pharma companies wanted to compete with each other. The intellectual property situations typically drive them to use different mechanisms, not the same. Right. So here we have this very strange, right? So I think this is the choice of mRNA platform was driven by the U.S. government, because mRNA, Moderna is a U.S. government, specifically military company. It was funded by DARPA, by BARDA, and by the Department of Defense, and they've thrown huge amounts of money behind it, both from the formation of the company in around 2010-11. Up until to COVID, when they gave them these huge contracts without the company ever producing any product before. And so I think that choice of mRNA is driven by whoever's financial
Sasha,
interest.
Let me give the kindest sort of blush on it and say, look, it was an emergency. We were in a hurry. This platform provided the opportunity to produce something that we knew would create immune reaction fast and just be able to manufacture it up and distribute it widely. I fault very little of what happened during Alpha and Delta, because there was a lot of emergency stuff done. But you react differently in an emergency than way down the line when things are no longer an emergency. And in fact, we're treating a different illness now. It's called Omicron. It's a different illness. And the risk of the vaccine remains the same. The risk of the illness has dropped dramatically. And you still are fearful of something about the illness. I don't know quite what. Everyone's freaking out about Omicron. But okay, some neurological injury. Okay, some cardiac stuff. Okay. Why not Covaxin? Why not the whole viral alternative if somebody really has strong feelings against the mRNA platform?
Right. Well, that's because, so as I said, it comes back to who owns that platform, who owns the mRNA platform, who is going to benefit from it. And we now have a whole company. It's also a U.S. government company. It's backed by the CIA. Scott Gottlieb on the board of directors. It's called National Resilience, who is the manufacturer of these juices for everyone. So they get cooked up in this National Resilience behemoth, which bought up a whole bunch of biological manufacturing facilities from pharma companies, cranking out these shots, owning the IP, getting the royalties, getting the profits, sending this to everyone, who then rebadges it into Pfizer, Moderna, Omicron, Delta, whatever, right? But the interests are held by those people, so they need to be questioned. We need to question those members of the board of directors of National Resilience, of Moderna, of Pfizer, about their interest and who are they tied to. And you will see very quickly that it all comes back. The strings go back to the CIA, the DoD, the U.S. government, who is pushing this. Otherwise, there is no explanation.
Yeah, I know. I'm struggling still 3 years out here, but you mentioned the government says you have to vaccinate everybody, and that comes from the CDC or somebody. And you said, "I'll tell you about that later." I want you to tell me about that now.
Well, so that also points to intent to harm, and intent to harm going back decades, maybe a couple of centuries. And so because, as I said, because of the knowledge of the effect of anaphylaxis, and because of the knowledge of what are the components of those vaccines, which resided primarily with the US government, it got pushed into the private sector, but as you can see, also comes back now through the military to this new mRNA platform. But it's been known and documented that the relevant people in CDC and their predecessors, whoever the public health service were, they knew about how toxic vaccines are, and that you can't really vaccinate without avoiding the effects of anaphylaxis, hypersensitizing everyone. And it's almost, there are some authors that are saying, who studied this for longer than I am, they're saying it's almost like they don't care what's in those brews, as long as they inject everyone, and they inject everyone with these random sets of proteins that eventually hypersensitize almost everyone to something. And eventually that something arrives later on, and it causes a severe reaction, it causes autoimmune condition, causes cancer, or causes something else. But it's sort of a built-in mass poisoning system that's been there. And as you know, the push to vaccinate everyone and vaccinate more and more and more has escalated dramatically. So where before the vaccine schedule was 3 to 5 shots, now it's 70 shots by the age of 18. If you have 70 chances of anaphylactizing somebody by the time, and actually 27 before they're 2 years old. So if you have 27 shots in your Russian roulette thing, do you think you're going to hit it? Yes. That's why we have the epidemic of chronic illness, of anything. And we have children now that you can't have children's parties anymore because they're all allergic to something. You know.
Talk about, I want you to switch gears for I have two sort of remaining questions. One, switch gears for a second and tell me about the so-called self-replicating vaccine that was being discussed. I'm worrying about the excesses on all sides. And to me, this was evidence of people getting carried away again.
Yes. So yeah, just to briefly address it. So as I looked at manufacturing before, I found that mRNA vaccines are not produced to what the label says at all, not even close. So there are general things found in them, such as RNA, DNA in very, very large quantities, toxic metals that are not supposed to be there at all, other contaminants, even macro things floating around. So all these things found, not a single vial that I'm aware of has been found to conform to the label. So they're telling you, you're getting a Toyota Prius and the next variant will come out and you will need a Jeep. And the next variant will come out, maybe you will need a Yaris. So you have an idea in your head that this Delta, Omicron, and something else, they have these distinct properties, and these products are designed specifically. We'll take the sequence of Delta and we will put it into here and it will produce this spike protein in your body. None of this happens. They don't have the Yaris, the Jeep, the Prius, whatever. They don't have any of that. They're just globes of metal. They're giving you one globe of metal and then another one and saying this one is a little bit heavier and this one is a little bit lighter. That's the only difference between them. And that's the only thing that they can measure in their manufacturing process. These products are just complete mess. So to say that, now you're going to have a self-replicating one, meaning that, we have now another sequence that has another piece of sequence that creates this replicon situation and it produces more. It's nonsense. If you can't make a Ford Focus, you can't make a turbo Ford Focus. So they can't make them.
Yeah. Good. So that's nonsense. I don't know why it's not being. It's weird that it floated around out there as a story for a long time without much pushback. But thank you for sort of helping clarify that. I mean, you probably push back on X, but I get pushback.
I'm not saying they're safe. They're completely unsafe. They should not be injected. But it's not going to oh my God, it's going to end humanity. No, it's not going to end humanity. Just don't inject these things, and they're just as bad as the other ones.
And then my last question before I let you go is, you're pointing at the U.S. government and the cozy relationships with some of these manufacturers. Why did the whole world go along with this? That to me is one of the biggest mysteries of the entire COVID experience, other than maybe it's just a new world order in the sense that we are all so connected in ways that we didn't realize. What's your theory? I mean, they were and picked up with the same enthusiasm, sometimes more in some areas, both not just in terms of vaccines, but in terms of lockdowns and masking, all these things that were essentially, and not the vaccine so much, but certainly the non-pharmaceutical interventions were the products and inventions of the Chinese Communist Party, and sort of picked up in Italy and then dispersed to the world. What the heck? Yeah. What's your theory about what happened?
Well, so this wasn't a surprise. COVID wasn't a surprise. COVID was pre-planned, obviously. So this shows evidence of pre-planning. And I'm not just saying that the behavior, but we actually did look at the law as well, and when those laws were put in place. And so the laws have been harmonized to this pandemic preparedness, public health emergency laws are very, very similar in the US, in the EU, in UK, especially Five Eyes countries, and then the rest of the world as well, pretty much harmonized to the same.
But hold on. But hold on. So it is all that that international pandemic preparedness stuff we heard about, the different war gaming and stuff. You're saying that harmonize the entire world, which I get, but we largely abandoned our pandemic preparedness plan. There was no 6-foot distancing. There was no lockdowns in our pandemic, and yet we ran to that side of the boat, and everybody went with us.
Right. So because also when they announced it as a military emergency. So in the US on February 4th, a phone call went out to all pharma companies telling them COVID is a national security threat when we had less than 10 cases in the US. Colonel Matt Hepburn made that phone call. I would like him to be subpoenaed to the Congress and ask his question, who gave him the authority? Who told him to do that?
How'd you hear about this? I didn't even heard about it. How'd you hear about that?
I have a leaked audio from AstraZeneca, including their CEO, Pascal Soro, discussing this in an internal AstraZeneca meeting.
You need to come back and can we play that?
Yes, we can play that. And so that alliance was started in 2017 between DARPA and AstraZeneca. So as I'm telling you, there's been a lot of years of pre-planning of this exercise, harmonizing the laws, making sure that when the military says, oh, it's a military exercise now. Remember Mike Pompeo said we're in live exercise and Trump was very surprised on air.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So that's when that shift happened and the military took over what was supposed to be a civilian public health emergency.
So that's why people that were in public health behaved so strangely. Because the behavior was inexplicably strange. And why, I guess, was Redfield or Redfield invented 6 feet out of thin air because somebody in the military was probably literally holding a gun over his head. Is there, do you have a thread on this?
I published an article. I'm very happy to come back and play that audio on your show. And people can assure themselves that this was, first of all, a pre-planned exercise, pre-practiced, all over the world, and then the military switched the tables on them immediately, telling them it's beyond your pay grade, it's national security, now we're in charge.
Doesn't that suggest that there was something about the viral release that had a, like you say, a national security, weapons of mass destruction sort of quality to your yes, okay.
Well, so yes and no. So there are layers of lying that is involved here. So the first layer is it's a zoonotic virus that jumped from a bat, and everybody believed that. And remember how much censorship went on? If anybody tried to question that, right? Okay. So that's the first layer. The second layer, after a few years of this and fighting and truth is coming out, they're like, okay, fine, we lied about the pangolin. But it was national security because bad Chinese people cooked up a virus and released it from the lab, right? Forgetting that it's NIH gave money and ordered specifically what virus to cook up. And also, you can't really make a pandemic virus. It's probably another longer discussion. But you can't make a pandemic-causing virus in the lab. You can make poison, you can deploy poison, but you can't make something that just like walks out and infects the entire world for a variety of scientific reasons, very well documented. So that part is also not quite real. They just use it as a narrative, as a very useful, scary narrative for people to fall in line so that they can tell to a public health professional, it's a military situation, don't worry about it, it's national security, just go and do this. And they go do this because they think that, oh yeah, maybe there's some secret stuff came out from the lab. And that's how they just get people to comply with it.
Wow. Well, listen, I have to let you go. I want to do a part 2 with the AstraZeneca tape. Where can I see the article you wrote, or can you send it to me?
I will send the link to you and to Emily. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. This has been very interesting. I knew things would have evolved since we last spoke. I didn't know it would be quite this astonishing. And I need to read up. I need to see I need to follow your evidence and see what I think about it. So I do appreciate you sharing with everybody. I don't know if everyone is quite as gobsmacked as I am by what you said. There's like 20 different things that you have pointed out today that I want to, in my brain was thinking, really?
Which one stood out the most?
The AstraZeneca tape, I'm starting to swim in some of it because so many of it had exclamation points at the end of the comments. But the fact that defense took over, the coordination internationally, the fact that it became a military exercise, the fact that the drug companies were engaged, and of course there's the NIH funding the research in Wuhan. I mean, this all has to be, these lines of evidence need to be kind of, almost like you need a giant flow chart. Is there a flow chart on your article?
I haven't made a flow chart.
Right?
Yet. But there is actually, yeah. So I also have Australian colleagues who've traced the same situation from Australia. It's showing the same scenarios and the same pre-planning activities, the same law, the same, so it's undeniable that this was pre-planned. So, but I'll be happy to come back and.
But I mean, you can. I always try not to put a sinister, twist to it. Like yes, it was pre-planned because they thought they were doing the right thing, and then it got used to do not the right thing, and so here we are. And then within that was a lot of question marks about why was it a national security threat? Why is the Department of Defense calling the shots? Why is everyone in the world listening to our Department of Defense? Was it something that we funded? Again, we need that flow chart. But Sasha, please keep going. I appreciate you sharing the information with us. I think I got all my questions answered for the moment. And let's find Sasha. Let me put out your particulars. Sasha Latypova Substack, which I'm sure you can read more about some of these fascinating ideas. And on X, Sasha _Latypova, Latypova. Let me quickly look at the restreams here. Susan, anything going on in the rants or anything that I should be aware of? Susan?
No, but I was going to say, I don't know if you remember on Dose of Dr. Drew when you and I used to do the little live stream, and I kept saying, I don't know, this just looks like a weapon of mass destruction. And it leaked out, and China was planning this the whole time.
Well,
like
Susan,
I always said that.
Susan's been concerned about this. And we should get you in, what's our Chinese scientist name? You probably know her, Sasha.
Caleb will remember. I can't.
Yan, Dr. Yan. Yeah, am I pronouncing the name right? What's the first name?
I'm not sure.
I believe it's Li Ming Yan, I believe.
Li Ming Yan. Oh. Li Ming Yan. She worked on the virus for the People's Liberation Army in Hong Kong, and was told she'd be disappeared if she spoke up, and she came over here. She had to come over here. So she has lots of ideas, and it'd be interesting to get the two of you side by side and see what how these things sort of overlap. So, all right, listen, thanks again, and sleep well tonight. I know I might have trouble, but thank you for sharing all this with us, and we'll see you again soon. So, and we're going to take a break. Of course. We're going to take a break here, and we are going to bring Dr. Jay Bhattacharya in here. He put on the Stanford Pandemic Conference, which is a model for how we should be moving forward with, our analysis of what happens so we don't make these mistakes again. People with differing opinions getting together and doing science and sharing ideas. Shocking. Imagine that. Isn't that what universities have been throughout human history? I guess during the Spanish Inquisition, not so much. Do we want to be like them, or we want to be like the universities as they were meant to be? Be right back with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya after this. I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it, I make Susan take it, my whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue, and we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15. pentadecanoic acid, it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. Many of us have not gotten over COVID. I'm not talking about the virus itself, but the response. We were flabbergasted about what the government could do to us. There is no telling what they might pull next time, and it's looking more like there will be a next time. So we all have to be what I call rationally ready. That's where the wellness company comes in. TWC is about access to physicians via telehealth, access to potentially life-saving medication. Years ago, having access to medication and telehealth might have seemed crazy, but now it seems crazy not to. Now, with claims that gain-of-function research have been done on the bird flu, I urge everyone to take control of their healthcare with the help of the wellness company. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off all their products, including the 4 medical kits, each of which has a different purpose. And we've added Tamiflu to one of them in case the bird flu does become a problem for humans. Be rationally ready. drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off.
Smell is sexy. Or sushi. Or Dr. Drupinski.
What?
Yeah, we're so lucky to have some of these great sponsors. Again, they have the pediatric kits now with the EpiPens carefully sourced in terms of the price. Check genetics. We all should be doing that so we can know what medications our doctors should be prescribing and avoiding side effects. Fatty, as I say, as I take Fatty, I make Susan take Fatty. And now seeing that we're going to talk about paleo and that the chicken sticks are back in stock, Paleo Valley, these guys made me crave a beef stick. You can read more about the chickens at drdrew.com/Paleo Valley. They're one of my favorite in addition to the venison and the beef. Chicken sticks does come in 2 varieties, and they're only like, I think 40 calories, maybe 60 calories. They're very low and high nutrition. They have a buffalo style, teriyaki style, and at Paleo Valley, the chickens are all pasture raised. They're carefully sourced, as is the beef stick. Protein sticks are nutritionally dense, 7 grams of protein, essential amino acids, of course, because these are good sources of protein. B12, niacin, selenium, antioxidants, phosphorus for bone health, and they're 50 calories. 50 calories in each chicken stick. Get them while you last. They are drdrew.com/Paleo Valley for 15% off your first order. Better yet, subscribe so you save 20%. You don't ever run out. That is drdrew.com/Paleo Valley.
You know what's really cute?
What's that?
I opened up a beef stick, and all of a sudden, Georgina came running through the curtain and was just staring at me like, can I have a bite?
Yep.
So she loves them too.
And so do I.
They're healthy for your dog.
Yep. We really like.
She's 15.
It's almost odd how much Paleo Valley is part of our regular nutritional plan.
You got to let a dog that's 15
bone
eat
broth,
whatever
got the bone broth,
right?
we eat it in our coffee. Yep.
Why deny?
Yep.
Why?
Yep. All right, let's get Jay Bhattacharya in here, physician. He's an epidemiologist. He's a decorated professor. You can follow him on X at DRJ Bhattacharya, BHATTACHARYA. And he very kindly joined us today on a moment's notice to give us a report on the pandemic conference that he held. Was it over the weekend? It seemed like it just happened. Welcome, Jay.
It was Friday. Yeah, it was Friday. Thanks for having me on, Doctor.
Listen,
really
I was so excited about this. Don't be silly, of course. As I've said, you to me are the poster child for the excesses of the pandemic, and as such, I love that you're leading the charge to take a good hard look at where this thing did well and where it jumped the shark and where it jumped off the rails. I was mortified that there were weird. People were taking aim at the conference, which I found reprehensible and sort of inexcusable. That to attack the idea that clinicians and experts come together to share ideas is somehow anathema to the current functioning of a university. That is disgusting that anybody would even suggest that. But tell me about that first, and then tell me about what you learned.
Yeah, so the conference itself, I've been trying to get Stanford, where I work as a professor, to have a conference like this for 4 years Drew, and it's really was a big. I was stressed out for 3 months trying to organize it but the university really stepped up to the plate. I was really happy with my department.
I thought so too.
The president of the university gave opening remarks where he emphasized, he didn't take sides on any of these issues, but he said, look, we're a place, Stanford is a place where these kinds of discussions are supposed to happen. We're a university after all, right? I mean, that, and he, I think that was a big step. And then the people who came to the conference are amazing. Anders Tegnell, who led the Swedish COVID response, was on a panel. My Great Barrington Declaration colleague, Sunetra Gupta, was on a panel. Actually, she was on 2 panels. One panel where she agreed with me on various things about the pandemic management. On another panel where she disagreed with me on the origins of COVID. It was a really, really interesting collegial exchange. My department chair was there, who very vehemently disagreed with me about lockdowns, but he stepped up and defended his positions in civil conversation with people people like Marty Makary of Johns Hopkins University, Martin Kulldorff. Not Martin. Unfortunately, Martin couldn't make it. Vinay Prasad. And we talked about how to manage a pandemic, global impacts of pandemic management, censorship, and COVID origins. Like really, really hot button topics with people that disagree with each other. It's exactly what a university is supposed to do: is host those kinds of discussions.
Yeah, Vinay has become clear and red hot in his positions over the last few months, and I was really, really interested to see his presence there because I found Vinay used to do maybe still does it, a podcast called I'm blanking what it was called.
C-Dog.
But it was it was before that. He did essentially a literature review of oncology publications as they came out. Oh. And I used to listen to him because I thought, wow, I'm fascinated by people that can penetrate literature of various types. Like I like philosophers that can read Kant and penetrate it and understand it and then explain it to me. And I feel the same way about certain oncological publications because he could contextualize it, he could criticize it, he could understand it with great clarity and then present it to any of his listeners. It was called plenary sessions. Plenary sessions, it was called back in the day. And I thought, wow, this guy is really such a great thinker and such an asset. And then COVID, and then his opinions started moving around, and then they've sort of lit fire in the last 6 months or so. But with the same clarity as he applied to everything else he's always done. And did any sort of consensus get reached in the course of all this?
Well, I think everybody agreed that whatever it is that we did in the United States was a total disaster. Like we closed schools, leading to tremendous harm to children. So I think at the very least, we all agreed on that. Whatever you thought the right policy was.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's a thing. That's something because that's been Vinay's point all along. It's like you close schools for no reason. You hurt kids, please, and then you mask 2-year-olds is his other thing. And both of which have no justification in terms of benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some interesting discussion about, well, what happens, what you do when there's real uncertainty right of a moment, right? So could you justify doing something? Yeah. I mean, of course, I have a position. I actually tried to stay out of it, Drew, because I didn't want to put my thumb on the scale since I was one of the organizers of the conference. I wanted to have everybody feel comfortable having their say. And as you know, everyone knows my positions anyway, so they're not that interesting to articulate over and over.
But hold on. Let me ask this. It seemed like a lot of consistently the tent that everyone runs into is we didn't know. And how come Jay Bhattacharya knew? How come Drew Pinsky knew Jay Bhattacharya was right? How do we know? And I would argue we didn't panic. We used our usual brain, our usual risk-reward analysis, and we arrived at a conclusion. These people were in a panic. And I think that was the error, is to allow emotion to determine your public policy.
I mean, it's not that I disagree with that. Of course, I agree with that. The issue for me is how do you change structures so that, knowing that people will panic, even experts might panic, how do you have a structure so that that good decisions nevertheless get made? So to me, the key thing is you have to impanel these discussions of people that disagree, even when you think you shouldn't. Even when it's there's an emergency.
So early. So right away.
This This should have happened in
that's
2020.
but by the way, that's what Ron DeSantis did, didn't he? You went down and did that panel with a couple other Nobel laureates and things, and he sat and you gave him the literature, he read it, you talked amongst yourselves, you had a panel, and he made a decision. And guess what? It happened to have been the right decision in terms of outcome. And no one is saying that out loud.
I mean, nobody has the monopoly on the truth. And people can make decisions, but they end up getting fixated on certain ideas. The way we correct that is by talking to each other. And you mentioned earlier at the beginning of this, Drew, this kind of counterattack to the conference. I was trying to think about why this counterattack's happening, right? The problem. Here's the premise. I'm going to only put myself in their shoes, right? So why are they attacking me and Stanford for having this conference? What they object to is that they think that by Stanford having the conference and those people who were in favor of lockdowns and all these other things early in the pandemic, if they appear with me, they platform me. They essentially authenticate my authority.
Please, I choke on that word. That is a word that has been invented to be used to silence people who are trying to have free speech and discourse. There is no such thing as platforming. For God's sake, I ran a show on HLN for 10 years where I interviewed Nazis and all kinds of interesting people. Is that platforming them? No, I just interviewed them and wanted to hear how their brains worked, and so we could really examine things carefully. And this idea of platforming, this is a propaganda word. I choke on it. I hate it. Sorry, but I don't want that word.
I obviously don't like this kind of reasoning. I'm trying to look at it from their point of view, right? But ironically, and this is the thing, by having this conference at Stanford with people from lots of different points of view reasoning with each other, the people that are attacking the conference because they've platformed people like me, ironically, they've deplatformed themselves. They've taken themselves out of the conversation, right? And it's it's the conversation itself is the cure for the problem that you suggested earlier, outlined, identified earlier. The conversation is how we get to the truth because nobody has a monopoly on it. We learn from each other, right?
So I saw you publicly trying very hard to get Peter Hotez onto the ship. He didn't come, and did he explain why he didn't come or anything?
We tried. In addition to the public invitation on Twitter, one of the conference organizers actually reached out to him directly and invited him in very kind ways. Like he told me, fly him out directly, like on whatever first class. And then Hotez's reasoning was that 200,000 Americans died because of vaccine misinformation, because they hadn't taken the vaccine, and that by putting people like Vinay or Marty McCary and others on the stage, it was platforming them, and that he didn't want to participate in that effort. It was just the thing. It's funny. Like Hotez wrote a book called The Rise of Anti-Science. He might have been writing about himself. I'm not sure. I haven't read the book. My friend who's helped organize the conference invited him to come and say, look, you can even promote the book. And my friend offered to voice Hotez's criticism to the panel that he was moderating, which was on misinformation, which he actually did, so people could respond to what Hotez's ideas were. I wanted Peter's ideas at the conference. It is not a bad thing to have them. I'm not threatened by them. I don't agree with them, but I'm not threatened by them being articulated and then reasoned over. Maybe I'll learn something. Drew, I just don't understand this. It's this idea that we should get rid of people because they have ideas I disagree with. It's just it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it made sense to Chairman Mao, and it made sense to Lysenko during the early years of Stalin. And it made sense to the Spanish Inquisition. So just look at the historical antecedents and which group do you want to be a part of? Do you want to be part of the ones that said let's welcome speech and open discourse, or the one that was the propaganda machines that silenced anybody that had contrary opinions? It's so apparent. But whatever. My great concern about Dr. Hotez, he's a lovely guy. He really is. Is I would like to know how he got up publicly and repeatedly changed his opinion as though he hadn't had a previous opinion about how many vaccines and what boosters are all about. Like, how did you do that? What were you thinking at the time? Because each time you came up, you said with new certitude, it's always been a 2-part vaccine. And then fast forward a month, it's always been a vaccine with boosters. It's like, well, if it's always been that, why didn't you tell us? Or what were you thinking? I'm just curious about that. And then secondly, I am getting very concerned about pediatricians having fiat opinions over adult medical doctors and opinions. I want their opinions in here, but for them, again, so many of the vaccine, infectious disease, public health personnel are pediatricians. And did I tell you about my conversation with Dr. Hotez? Did I ever share this with you?
No.
He was in a panic. He, by the way, panicked. He was in a panic that if he got COVID, his brain would shrink. Haven't you read the British literature about the brain shrinkage? And I thought, well, I have, and it concerns me. But then I thought, oh shit, he doesn't understand that anytime an adult gets a serious illness, we get brain shrinkage. In fact, I have an article, I don't know if it's here on my computer right now, I don't have it up, I have a different computer, about the mechanism for brain shrinkage during pregnancy and during severe illness in the elderly. It happens routinely. And guess what? Most of the time, at least if it doesn't get too bad and if we're at a certain age, we recover. And there are things we can do to help ourselves recover, and we all kind of know those things these days. But he was convinced that he would lose his cognition if he got COVID, and he did not have any clinical experience to understand how adults deal with severe illness. And of course it would affect him, because guess what? Kids don't get that. Kids don't have that. They don't get that reaction. Adults get that reaction. And so I thought, wow, his entire vaccine panic is around that phenomenon that is not in his judgment arsenal around infectious diseases. He doesn't have the right clinical experience to make a call, a risk-reward call around that particular issue that he's so focused on. So I don't know if, I'm sure that didn't come up during the conference, but that's one of the things I'm concerned about in terms of public health policy.
Well, I mean, that just points to the fact that we need to be speaking to each other. There's not, you remember early in the pandemic, you couldn't speak unless you're an epidemiologist. Only epidemiologists apparently know how to order all of society during a pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was right. Absolutely insane kind of reductionist approach to the kind of expertise needed. What, you know, I would rather have had philosophers in charge. I would rather have had theologians in charge than the epidemiologist
No, I get that. I get that. Yeah.
And you know, I think we just need to be much more tolerant of each other. You know, and I think Dr. Hotez, I don't know what else to say about him. Maybe the less said the better. I do think, like, for just, let's
get him to a conference. Let's get him to a conference. Yeah. That's we got to get him. We got to get everybody on the ship and start functioning again as a scientific community. I mean, the fact that we don't is you know, heartbreaking on certain levels.
Adults.
Yeah, you know, I guess, you know, there's a weird thing about academia these days where, you know, alternative opinions aren't any opinions. You know, there's a canon and that's it. Thus saith the Lord, and that is contrary. I'm so glad to see Stanford not being like that. It's a breath of fresh air. It's sort of surprising.
That's radical.
Right.
Yeah.
In 2020, I've been at Stanford now for almost 25 years. What was it? 24 years now. And in 2020, I was so disappointed at the university. I've collected a lot of swag over the years. You know, hats, like T-shirts, sweatshirts, and stuff. I almost burned them all. I mean, I was like, okay, I was so disappointed at the university. And now, after the conference, I went and bought a hat. I don't think I have. I bought another hat. I'm wearing a Stanford red shirt underneath. I mean, I'm pretty proud of the university all of a sudden, because I mean,
listen. You said that when we were in Canada. You talked about how much you love being in academia and how much you love Stanford. And that came ringing through to me. And so when this conference happened, I thought, wow, this is good. And then the president speaking to me was a cherry on top.
Yeah, it was quite something. And I think the idea is that this should not be a one-off. I'm hoping that having Stanford hold a conference like this, it authorizes universities all across the world to start holding conferences like this. The idea is to have it's going to take a long time. What happened during COVID was so complicated, affecting so many aspects of life, not just medicine, that it's going to take a long time for us to process and unwind. And that means we're going to need lots and lots of people talking to each other. And I hope universities all around the world take this up and start saying, let's hold these conversations. Let's figure out how to be a society that responds to pandemics better than we did the last one.
I have another one, Susan. We got to go to the next one. We got to sit and take it in. And for sure, I would like to go to another one of those wherever it should occur, but especially up under your umbrella. There's another layer to this too. I just before you was talking to Sasha Latypova, and apparently there's a Department of Defense component of this that I didn't realize how pervasive and how its tentacles were sort of reaching out into so many of the inexplicable aspects of the pandemic response. I'm trying to get her to put together a flow chart as she understands it. She says the same findings were uncovered by her Australian colleagues independently of her work. So if I can get that would be interesting also to sort of, I'll send it your way, to sort of, again, these layers to all the complexities.
Well, actually, I heard the tail end of that conversation. I didn't get hear the full of it. I will say this: a couple of things that I've learned. One is that in the U.S., I don't have security clearance or special access. This stuff is just out that I've learned from reading unclassified stuff. First, the CDC wasn't the primary decision-making body in the U.S., as you might have expected during a public health event, right? It was actually the National Security Council. In 2020, the National Security, which is actually a striking thing. Like essentially, the federal government treated this more like a bioterror event than a public health event. Like normally,
maybe it
public health. Well, I mean,
and that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Maybe it was something on that level. We just don't know it yet.
Well, it's I don't know exactly, but I mean, what I've seen is that it's very likely was a lab leak, an unanticipated lab leak. It was a lab leak that at a lab that the U.S. government in China that the U.S. government supported with research that where there was a Defense Department proposal, not funded by the Defense Department in 2018, that looked like a recipe for how you create a pandemic virus.
This
virus,
this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's publicly available knowledge.
Yeah, it's called the Diffuse proposal, and DARPA was the agency that denied it, but it was a recipe for how to do it. I don't know for certain. This is the kind of thing where like governments have very strong incentives to cover it up. The researchers themselves who are involved have very strong incentives to cover it up, but it looks very, very, very fishy. It seems very likely that this was like that. Certainly, what I can say is that the normal public health response to a pandemic that I would have expected is not what happened in 2020. What happened, the lockdowns were an absolutely extraordinary inversion of what I thought normally we would do to respond to a virus that spreads by aerosols, respiratory virus kind of pandemic. It just didn't make any sense to me. But if it were a mistaken response to a bioterror, like thinking it's a bioterror event, well, let's lock down. It's the kind of thing you do if there's like in some like horrible sci-fi movie about Andromeda Strain or something. Although that's a great book, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it would make a lot more sense in that sense. But then the question is, how can we be robust to that? We should not be doing bioterror responses to public health events.
Yeah, that's right. And let me just point out that was exactly the reaction I had back when it all happened, which is like, well, this is not making any sense at all. It's opposite. Since when the last time we quarantined healthy people was in Venice in the 11th century, and it was a huge mistake. And then you proposed in the Great Barrington Declaration to quarantine sick people and at-risk populations. Nothing shocking about that. But when it comes to pandemic preparedness, I've spoke to some people who were on the pandemic preparedness committees, and the pandemic preparedness looked nothing like what we did. We abandoned all the pandemic preparedness, which is essentially isolate sick people, mitigate risk. CDC serves a advisory function to clinicians. Local clinicians make the decisions. None of that happened. It all came from on high in this centralized way that was shocking. And then people with centralized authority, like county health officials, state health officials, hospital administrators sucked up the rest of the authority and did exactly what the superior authorities were saying, which was the wrong thing, not the right thing. And it was dangerous and it was destructive. And they maintained it in states like this, where authoritarianism appears to be attractive, way longer than they should have, and harmed more people as a result. That's the reality of what happened. Why did it happen like that has still yet to be answered. And I think we got to answer it so we can mitigate the potential of that ever happening again, unless it's appropriate. We can specify when it is appropriate. You know what I mean? This was not that time.
It would have to be an absolutely extraordinary set of circumstances. It's really hard to think of a if you have suppose you have a very deadly virus, and it doesn't spread, but it doesn't spread all that easily. Like, take Ebola or something. Lockdown's the wrong response. Local quarantine is the right response, right? If it would have to be something like the kind of virus or pathogen would have to be very, very, very extraordinary. And you'd have to account for the fact that the lockdown's not going to work for very long, if at all, especially for the vast majority of the human populations that cannot lock down. So it's hard to think of a scenario where this would have been the right response. Actually, one thing we could do is something I've joined an organization called Biosafety Now. They joined the advisory board, and the goal of it is to have public oversight of scientific experiments like these gain-of-function responses. Right now, what happens is the scientists themselves can decide whether to take risks that involve potentially putting everyone on Earth at risk. I think the public should have a say in that. And there's a bill that's now going through the U.S. Senate that would allow the public to have a role in saying whether scientists. It's kind of like I don't know if you ever or read about the nuclear, the development of the nuclear bomb, like the movie Oppenheimer, right? There were a lot of concern that just testing the nuclear bombs would create a chain reaction that would destroy the Earth. And they were physicists doing these calculations saying, okay, is it going to do it or not? They were very, very concerned about that. The public didn't really have a say in that, did they? They're doing these experiments where if the math is just a little bit different, it consumes the Earth. The question, if you're going to do risky scientific research, is shouldn't the public who is going to be impacted by this research have a say in whether it's get done? So there's this Risky Research Review Act put out by Senator Rand Paul to allow the public to have some say over whether those kinds of risks ought to be taken.
That's good. I mean, Rand Paul has been spot on the whole way through on this thing. And
absolutely.
Yeah, you got to get him to one of these conferences too. It'd be very interesting if he would show up at them.
Politicians are a little harder to get to come, but yeah, absolutely.
I bet. Are you planning another one yet, or is that is it too much?
It's funny because I told you 3 months of stress to organize this one, and I woke up sick the 2 days after the conference. If you finish the final exam, your immune system's shot, and then that's what happened to me. So but I'm going to rest this week, but I do want more of these. Oh, Susan, go ahead.
You caught COVID?
I don't think I think it's just a cold.
All right, listen, congratulations on this. This to me is a breakthrough moment. It's I hope it continues to be a crucible that can be carried forward. I do feel like I think there's going to be, people are so aversive. I think Stanford's going to have to continue to do it before anybody else picks it up and follows your lead, but they will if Stanford continues to lead the way. I mean, it's a great university to have leading this, and I think it's a feather in your cap and in the university's cap generally. And I just want to see a restoration of public health as we know it, scientific discourse as we know it. There's so much that needs to be restored, and I don't know. Hats off to you. I'll go come up and buy my Stanford hat and tip it to you as well when the next conference happens.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for doing this. And anytime you need to discuss anything else here, please join us, okay?
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much. Yes, as I say to everyone all the time, Jay is the poster child for the excesses of the COVID experience. And my hope is that he will continue to lead us out so we can... he just needs to be at the front end of all this, and I'm glad he is. Okay, let's look at the schedule. I know.
That's a pretty big deal to get the president of the university to allow this type of free speech. I didn't think we'd ever get back to that point.
He spoke at it. He spoke. He did the opening speech. And he Stanford is, up there with the obviously with the Harvards and the Yale, the Princetons and whatnot. I don't think anybody else in the West could have had the impact that Stanford does. They're great institutions here, but if Caltech had done it, it would not have been the same thing. Having Stanford do it, I think, is very, very meaningful. And
stuff like that gives me hope. Like some people are seeing through the fog. Like the president of the university has got to be deep in all this stuff and to see through the fog and be like, well, let's just let these people have some free speech. Let's not suppress everything from them.
I mean, isn't that what they teach in colleges?
Right.
No,
exactly.
Susan, they don't anymore. They don't. This is the point. That's not really happening on college campuses as much as we imagine it is. It needs to be restored. Ideas need to be restored. Free speech is got to be our goal here. All right, we have I don't know if you have the full list up there, Caleb, but we have an extraordinary list of guests coming up, including Alex Jones in here tomorrow, Robert Malone in on Thursday. I think I saw Malone at the conference. I'm not sure. I got to
get Alex Jones on my show.
Good luck with that.
Absolutely.
She'll be doing her show on Thursday afternoon. I'll be at noon on Thursday with Malone. Chef Andrew Gruel coming back. I think he's going to be in studio with this Dr. Scott Atlas and Darshan Shah. Elizabeth Pipko and Brittany Meyer. We have so many. And then Cheryl Atkinson just got booked. These are very significant guests with lots to say.
On our game.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's just such a pleasure to talk to all these people.
A few that aren't on this list, including Salty Cracker that we have booked in November that you aren't seeing on here.
Yes, I have Salty Cracker's back on the list. And I've talked to her about some other folks that I want to try to get that she's working hard on. So yeah, thank you so much to Emily and everybody for being a part of this. We've crossed 300,000 at Rumble, so we appreciate your support there.
On Rumble said that he's in college and it's all about just falling in line.
Yeah, it is about towing a line, and it's the opposite of what I thought college was learning to think and think for yourself. This is not something that is tolerated as well now. Let's see. Looking at the restreams.
Well, if you want to pass the class, you have to go with whatever the professor says.
Okay, Oceana did shoot to the super chat says, I'm not sure if I get this. Drew, a campaign would be to be a clip of this show disappearing live when I mentioned alternative treatments. Oh yeah, that was Caleb. You remember that we had to go to when the YouTube would just drop out when we mentioned certain medicines and things. It's crazy. Yeah. Okay. So tomorrow we are here at 3:00 again, and it is Alex Jones. I'm reflecting back on when RFK Jr. told me I was courageous for having him on a show and having a conversation. I feel like tomorrow I'm being courageous having Alex Jones on the show. We'll see how that goes.
He loves you.
Listen, I'm committed to talking to everybody, and we'll see how that goes.
He's getting everything taken away, so.
Well, I'm interested in who Alex Jones is. No one ever talks to him about his story. He's an old radio guy, and so I'm just interested in how he got to where he is now. So we're going to do a lot of that kind of talk.
Austin, Texas, where I grew up in Austin, Texas, on small radio.
I used to hear him on the radio.
Oh, yes. In my dad's truck when I was a kid, you would hear him yelling about stuff, and now being proven correct on at least a bunch of those things 20, 30 years later. So I definitely have a couple interesting questions for him about his history.
Well, I would love you to jump in early on that. Thank you for bringing stuff to the table. I'm had a long day today. I'm going to wrap it up right here. We appreciate you guys being active on the rants and over on the restream. I'm looking again over there. Susan, anything else on your front?
Somebody just asked if I was doing a show on Thursday. Yes, molten salt.
Yes. Oh, who is it? Oh, molten salt was asking the question. Do you have a guest yet for Thursday?
Emily Barsh.
Emily Barsh going to come in on Thursday? Wow, that would be interesting.
No, we're putting together two psychics with two potential guests and Emily Barsh. Yeah, I'm working on it. It's coming together.
All right.
It's going to be a good time.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you tomorrow at 3:00. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.